Hang on. Some reason it's not broadcasting
Oh.
properly.
Hmm.
Hang on. Let me try to figure out what's going on.
Sure.
Doctor is on Twitch watching us. Doctor, is it any better now? Can you hear me? Okay. All right, cool. All right, let me just double check LinkedIn. For some reason, Streamlabs wasn't piping this through properly. Why is it not doing that? Sorry for the technical delays, people. Not quite sure why there's bugs happening when it's been fine, though. They're 400 times done this in this month so far. But I'm glad Twitch people can hear us fine. All right. In the meantime, since we got people on Twitch and YouTube watching, welcome. And over here on Start Mata as well. I guess we can get started while I try to figure out the LinkedIn stuff on the back end. So, Morvareed, please introduce yourself.
Sure. So, hi everyone. Morvareed Salehpour. I'm a business and technology lawyer. So I work with entrepreneurs, startups, and small and mid-sized businesses, basically as outside general counsel. I help with negotiating, drafting contracts with customers, vendors, strategic partners. I help with data privacy issues, intellectual property licensing and monetization, and mergers and acquisitions when clients get to that point.
Fantastic. There's been a lot of interesting conversations been popping up in the different communities that I'm a part of over here on Start Mata and Discord server I run too called Our Startups. I'd like to hear from you while we wait for people to post questions. Use the chat to post questions or share what you're working on. Moreover, you can provide insights, best practices on how to find lawyers, what legal aspects you should be paying attention to and bring up with your lawyers, and then also just general feedback on ideas and such. None of it constitutes legal advice. Maureen, you can add more to that as well. But yeah, please use the chat to get in on wonderful mentors' experience and expertise. With that said, Morvareed, a couple things came up with early founders. And one of the issues that we see often are people jumping to use AI and blockchain to solve problems that they perceive. And some of those could be real issues in a market or industry. Sometimes it's, someone thinks they're onto something that's not a real issue at all. But what I like to hear from, your experience, your perspective, especially as a lawyer, what are some of like the common factors that founders overlook when they're rushing to utilize AI or blockchain technology as part of their product or service?
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, one thing I've noticed is that sometimes people aren't thinking really critically
Common
about the problem they're solving in the market, and they're more focused on using whatever is the kind of FOMO moment, right? Like, okay, it's blockchain right now. Let's stick blockchain into what we're doing. Oh, AI is the big word now. Let's make sure we stick AI in it because they think that's going to allow them to get funding and traction. So it's not really that their product, like there's no real logical sense while blockchain or AI would actually make the product better, but it's been stuck in because it's something that they think is going to get them traction, right? So I think it's just kind of thinking about what you're doing and really being like, is this actually adding anything to my product? Or is it just making it overly complex? Because again, if you're making something more complex than it needs to be to launch it, it's going to cost a lot more to have it operate, to deal with the legal complications, to deal with all the operational issues. So it's something to kind of like consider.
No, I appreciate you bringing that into focus. Yeah, the complexity. It's something that founders at every kind of like stage of experience can still fall into the trap of, because you get so in love with your idea, the vision of what you want to bring to the world as this finished product, and it's often something that people hyper focus on and think that that's what they need to bring the market right now, without realizing that following lean methodology and working within your means, your constraints of resources, that it's best to just be as simple as possible and slowly work that way towards that grand vision while running these tests and validating your assumptions and understanding that what you're doing is actually providing value and a service to people. So yeah, really great insights for you to share. Um, what are some related issues with using? And I know this comes up often when we're doing this, but it's something that I see like every day with founders using some of these turnkey solutions. Providing legal services through a SaaS platform or something else like that, that people are using to create, terms of service, operating agreements between partners, other such documents and contracts. Like, what are some of the pitfalls that you see when you're working with clients that are caused by using those services?
Yeah, so a lot those services really aren't meant to create you documents that are specific to your situation and the nuances of your, like, well, how your business operates, maybe the relationship you have with your co-founders. So those are always when the messy situations arise, right? It's quite common where someone's maybe just used whatever operating agreement was that came with whatever system they decide to use, like LegalZoom or something, but it's never really they never took the time to like negotiate and actually get a agreed agreement in place with their co-founders. And so there's always, at some point they're not going to be on the same page a couple years down the road. And now everyone's in a dispute, but guess there's a bad agreement in place. So it's not actually helping you resolve the dispute, right? So now you're kind of fighting it out, wasting time, resources. Often the business falls apart because of founder disputes, right? So now your business isn't even really going anywhere because you can't get on the same page and your agreement is not really clear about what happens then. So it it really doesn't serve a business for particularly important agreements like the co-founder agreement. And I'll take the example of like the terms of service and privacy policy as well. That is one that so many businesses get so wrong because they're just trying to cut and paste for somewhere or using some kind of like general, like application that's trying to create that. But again, these are very specific. They really depend on how your business is operating. What is it doing? What is it selling? What are the different legal and regulatory requirements that apply to that? So those have to be like worked in. Data privacy is really complex. There's so many different data privacy laws and regulations these days, and there's more and more going into effect like every day, right? Like that's such a fast changing space. Like there is no way to be on top of that by using some kind of automated service, right? And that's where I'm seeing a lot of businesses then get into trouble and get liability, right? Because they aren't appropriately handling data and they're not getting appropriate consents and notices from the users of their platforms. And so they're getting hit with lawsuits and regulatory action based on all of that because they failed to take the proper steps to put in place not only appropriate agreements, but put in appropriate consents and notices that are required based on the specifics of the data they're intaking, handling, and how they're sharing it on the back end.
Appreciate the insights. Yeah, um, it's such a common thing, and it's kind of interesting how you know people are choosing to be in a rush and skipping those steps, and also thinking that they're avoiding risk by avoiding the cost of paying a lawyer like yourself to do these things appropriately, following, or, establishing all the correct context around what the business and, the founders intend to do and how they want to do it. And again, making sure it follows, proper, legal restrictions. And what they're ultimately doing is creating more risk by trying to, avoid spending money like that. Um, what are some of the more interesting things that you've seen happening for more mid-sized startups that you work with, or you're keeping aware of in regards to trends and different legal hurdles that are popping up? As we talked about before, there's a lot of different uh, kind of law being established around AI and copyright and how that applies. But are there anything else that you're seeing come up, whether that's from a case law standpoint or something that's having an impact on fundraising or investing?
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, as businesses kind of start to scale, they have other opportunities to try to kind of grow and monetize their offerings, and that's where they have to kind of be strategic about what they're doing, and everything has to be kind of thought out and done like with counsel like involved and expert, like people advising you involved. So I often see like as businesses scale, they start to explore like different types of like partnerships or alliances or collaborations with other businesses. And that's a really good way to grow your business, right? To get more traction, to maybe open up a different market or create a different revenue stream potentially. But there's really complex issues involved with all that around intellectual property ownership and rights, like data usage and data privacy and security. And if you are not, you know, really understanding the situation, you could end up unintentionally giving away your intellectual property and losing the most valuable asset in your business, right? Because you just don't understand the legal implications of what you're doing. So that's where, I, I'm glad, it's good that my clients get me involved because I'm able to help them figure out what structure to even move forward as, right? If this is their goal, like what kind of structure makes sense to get you where you need to be while we protect your IP. And also a lot of times, there's situations that come to them and they're like, well, we'd like the revenue. Like even yesterday I was talking to a client who was like, oh, I want to do this thing. I'd like the revenue so I can continue to grow scale. But I was like, this is the thing they're asking you is ridiculous. Like it's ridiculous. It's if you go down this route, you're basically giving away your IP. So you either need to negotiate it to be like this, or you need to consider like maybe walking away from this opportunity because it's not actually an opportunity. It's actually like hurting you. So it's like having those real conversations of like understanding what is the actual opportunity? What do I have to negotiate to make this something that works for me? Or is this something that if they're not going to move on, it doesn't actually make sense for me to move forward with?
Yeah, like that conversation that you just demonstrated brought up something. My background's in photography, for those that don't know. And when I was young, just out of high school, I started working with Getty Images, and there was a term that I didn't understand, and I didn't really, you know, I didn't have the experience to know the implications of it, and it's related to what you're talking about, a buyout. I agreed to do a buyout deal with Getty Images for all the concerts that I was shooting when I first started working with them. And being a kid, they're like, "Oh, we'll pay you up front. It's for your buyout." And I was like, "Oh yeah, that's awesome, cool. I get money up front. I don't need to worry about it. Yeah, I'm a kid. I can spend this to buy a lot more like fun stuff and camera gear or whatever, right?" And then I like was talking to another friend who was a photographer, older one, mentor, and they're like, "Oh, buyout means that you're giving up your copyright. They own it now. Those are their photographs, not yours." And I was like, "Wait, what?" So with that in mind, I'd love to hear some key terms that founders, creators should be aware of when someone wants to either buy their copyright, utilize their copyright, license it? What are some key things that are traps like that that someone unaware would be in a situation like that?
Well, I'll say one of the most common things I often see. It's not really like a necessarily like a key term, but what happens is often like, you know, client will have like a great, the executives will have a great discussion with executives in another business, right? And they're like, we had this great discussion, like this is what we agreed on. Here is the agreement that they sent us. And then I'll look at the agreement. I'm like, this is totally not what you just told me. This is something totally different. Like this is not what you just told me. Right. And they'll be like, no, 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 but we agreed. And it's like, yeah, but I'm like, the agreement that they sent to us does not say that. It says something totally different that is like one-sided, not in your favor, not this. So that is just like a common issue where it often takes, even if you think you're on the same page, you're not actually on the same page, right? And so that's why it's important to get legal counsel involved because they can tell you this is not the same page. Like, don't sign this. You need to negotiate this. And sometimes, I find like sometimes they'll go back and forth and they'll be like, well, now we're on the same page. And I'll be like, nope, you're still not on the same page, right? So at some point, it's like you got to get like legal counsel on the phone call with like from both sides and then make sure the attorney on the other side like I've had to like help them understand that's not what our clients are agreeing to, right? Our clients are agreeing to this. Your client is admitting on the telephone call that this is what they have agreed to our with my client, so we need an agreement that actually reflects that. So that's something which I think comes up a lot, but a lot of times it also I guess involves like you're like I guess I always ask my clients like questions and want to know what their goals and intents are. Like sometimes a lot of attorneys don't necessarily do that. They'll just, you send them an agreement, they're like, oh, I'll just review it, right? But I always want to understand the goals and the intent, but short and long term, so I can make sure any agreement is actually reflective of what the intent is. So that's something to be, you want to make sure, like when you're talking to an attorney, you're telling them like what the intent is so that they can make sure the agreement is actually in line with the intent that is being intended for the relationship with the other party, whether it's a customer or a vendor or a strategic partner.
Yeah, I mean, context. It goes back to the theme of context. It, keeps coming up with a lot of these questions and how to best protect yourself. Um, with that in mind too, right? Like, how would you recommend in terms of like a methodology for a prospective client or a client that you're already working with to document what those goals are in a way that can help save time and money working with a lawyer like yourself and really hit the ground running without having to go through exhaustive conversations to kind of like get those details out of them, right? Like
Right.
what can a founder do to prepare before sitting down and getting into those?
The best thing any business could do is come to like my clients when they come to me early. I'm able to help them the most because they will often, if they don't get me involved until later, they'll have all these discussions with the other side, but they don't know the questions to be asking or the topics that need to be raised. They don't know what the key issues are, so they're kind of like talking in a vacuum and saying things that aren't necessarily helpful to them. So it's only after, they come to me and we have a discussion where I'm telling them, okay, these are the problems of what you want to do. These are the things we need to like get from the other side. Like these are the things you need to push for. These are the topics you have to talk to them about. So it's only once they have a structure for how to approach these negotiation calls between the business people that they're actually able to move forward in a productive way. So that's why I think if you have like a deal that you particularly it's going to be like a bigger deal or a more complex deal, or even if it's like a lot of what I do is also product counsel, like helping clients think about like what to launch their product with, like what features, things like that, right? So it's like if you're getting to that point, you're kind of needing to come up with a strategy. It's good to get counsel involved early so that counsel kind of tell you where the problem spots are for what your ultimate goal is, so you can approach those discussions or the launch of your product in a way that's in line with what is most protective for you from like a legal side so that you can scale your business and protect your IP assets.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And it also kind of like leads into another question I'm curious about, and it comes up often, this idea of moats. Businesses want to build moats to protect themselves, and intellectual property being a key one of those. But with each business, right, whether or depending on the industry and the market and the type of business that it is with the product it's offering to people as a service, these moats can have different value or applications. So I'm curious too, with this idea of there being universal moats. What are your thoughts on that? Like, you know, how would you express to founders out there how to assess what moats are and how to, I guess, weigh them appropriately for their business before talking, to a lawyer, of course.
Well, I think, it, really, I think anyone who starts a business, they're kind of good at whatever it is that they have training in, right? So, if they're a tech person, they're good at the tech side. If they're like a marketing person, they're good at the marketing side. So I really think it's important to like bring in the experts early because that's how you can actually like instead of trying to like struggle and figure out yourself like what's the valuable part of your business, what should I focus on, like once you bring in kind of experts with experience in that space and working with in that area, you are able to be a lot more efficient and effective in building a business and basically prevent waste of time and resources. So I can even, I'll give an example where there was a business I talked to and they had built out their hardware and software prototype for about 2 years, like putting in, money to get a prototype, obviously, right? The investment of time and money to do that. They hired consultants to like advise on all of that. And then they have come to me, but their business model was illegal. So at that point, they were at a position where, they had to like do a 180 that wouldn't even get rid of the criminal liability for what they had been operating as for the last 2 years. And then what was going to be costly too, so they decided to shut down their business, though it didn't solve all the criminal issues, but they decided to shut down their business, but that could have easily been avoided if they'd come to me when they were just starting off their business and said like, hey, this is what we're doing, this is our thoughts about how we want to like monetize it, like, what are your kind of initial thoughts? And I would have been like, well, yeah, spend a couple hours, been like, that's illegal, so don't do that. And that would have allowed them to restructure their business from the very start so they could have a business that someone would invest in and that could grow and scale versus a business that had to be shut down.
Yeah, it's I see. You're just making me laugh because there was someone that came in to the community a few days ago, and yeah, it was essentially that. Like they wanted to create this business that was clearly illegal, but they're like, "Oh, we're going to use blockchain," and it's like it doesn't solve anything. It's just because you're using a technology doesn't mean that it's meeting regulations and avoiding like legal requirements. So it's just I don't know. It's just too common with some of these, mostly
Yes.
younger kids, right? That get a little bit
All
overzealous.
ages. I see all ages. I think it's like people think they found like some amazing loophole and it's like it's not a loophole, like the reason no one else is doing it because it's legal. That's why.
You're right. I shouldn't put the younger generation on blast. Yeah, yeah. But that's a great comment too, though. It's like if you're not encountering it, why are you not encountering it? It's
Mhm.
either because it's illegal or the barrier to entry due to the resources required is immense, and it's
Mhm.
typically not worth it for anyone to try doing it. So
Right.
it's a very important thing to take note of and do the research into and investigate before you rush ahead. Um, what are your thoughts on the idea of, again, like related theme, failing fast and just rushing ahead and dealing with the consequences later. You've called attention to some very serious material consequences that could occur, but what are some other kind of like, thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I will say the business, like the businesses that I've seen fail, it's not because they had a bad idea, it's because they didn't actually try to build a sustainable business, right? They try to cut corners, they try to just get out the whole fast, right? And that's where problems arise. So businesses aren't really failing because, their idea wasn't good. It's failing because, like, guess what? They want to go seek investment, but they have all these legal liabilities. Their books are a mess, right? Nothing is actually works appropriately. So guess what? No investors are going to want to invest in a company that is just liabilities and has finance issues. So I think a lot of, particularly like first time founders, don't realize the importance of actually building a sustainable business that someone wants to invest in. I think they kind of think like, oh yeah, I'm just going to get investors to do everything and it'll be fine. I just need a good idea. And it's like, no, that's not how you're going to build a business that grows and scales. But I I just think a lot of people, or a lot of would-be founders or early stage founders, they kind of live in a fantasy land sometimes. So I've had multiple people, for example, reach out to me and say that they have this great idea. They are looking for investment and they're going to need legal help. And then I'll just ask them the very basic question of, okay, so have you set up your company? Like, what's it called? Where did you headquarter it? All of that. Oh, I haven't set it up yet. The investors are going to pay me to set it up, which it's just bizarre. Why would an investor pay you to set up a company? What are they going to take equity in? You already need a company for them to be even willing to take equity in something. But again, I think some people are living in a fantasy and they think, oh, I have an idea. I'm going to be amazing, but everyone has ideas. Ideas aren't even protectable as intellectual property. It's just an idea. And guess what? Everyone who thinks they have a unique idea, I've spoken to like 50 other people with the same idea. That's what investors are doing as well. VCs are speaking to multiple people with the same idea. That's why they don't, generally sign NDAs. So it's just something like consider. Your idea is not that special. Your execution is what's important.
Again, brilliant insights that a lot of people need to hear, and it also, again, I love these conversations because it leads to so many other, great kind of follow ups. With that said, the importance of building a business, like a legitimate business, especially this economy where things are pretty unstable and uncertain. It makes it so investors want to bet on the deal that's not only the most, like, has the most potential in terms of scalability, but the team and their aptitude and ability to execute, but also the deal that's carrying the least amount of risk. And that risk is typically associated with the unknowns, the assumptions, and also, as you've pointed out, the foundation of the business that it's, what it's built upon with the legal, agreements, contracts in place, all those different elements, and then, showing revenue, showing repeatable processes, right?
Mhm.
I'm curious, with your experience, what factors do you think are playing the most role in investors assessing these deals that are coming across, their table, their inbox, whatever it may be, in trying to determine the risk profile? What things are kind of increasing that risk or decreasing that risk?
Yeah, well, I think one thing that is always going to be important for these investors, or like especially in markets like this, is one, revenue, right? They want to make sure the business is already having traction, it already has revenue coming in, right? So they can be like, okay, we can scale this. And one of the things with revenue is the again, the customer agreements are going to be very important. So that's why I always tell clients, like, customer agreements are one of the most, it's like the one of the first things you should prioritize in your business, like having a good strong customer agreement, because it basically allows you to have your revenue on the books, and also addresses your liability, like your liability exposure to these customers, which is something that investors care about as well. So, like, customer agreements are very important in due diligence when that is done by either investor or acquirer. So that's a big thing. Other big things are often like if there's a mess in terms of the equity on the books, right? Like a lot of, I think, or often sometimes startups will make a lot of mistakes around equity and try to just give equity to everyone, which isn't really like, it doesn't really make sense. Like you shouldn't be giving equity to everyone you're just trying to work with, right? You're trying to keep one control of the company. You don't want a messy cap table when you're looking at investors. And why are you giving people who you may work to with for a couple months ownership in your company forever? Like it makes no sense, right? So a lot of founders get in trouble that way because they just have really messed up their cap table. So investors are going to want a lot of cleanup done there before they will invest. Often finances are a mess. They haven't stayed on top of properly accounting and doing bookkeeping and all of that. So it's like a mess in terms of someone going in and looking at the due diligence. So they'll have to like engage professionals to come in and clean things up, which can be really costly and really difficult. And I definitely know, like CPAs who are like, this is too much of a mess. We're not even going to take this on because it's such a mess.
That's intense. Like my dad and brother are CPAs, so to be at that level of mess,
Right.
like that's like, oh my goodness. Yeah, just close the company, start over. But it's always funny because a lot of what you're talking about, a lot of the foundational elements of a business are what people, especially in the startup circles, reject because they think it's too corporate, and it's probably come up in conversations with us before. And it's so critically important to engage with these things and put together the documentation and do things correctly, as corporate as it may feel. It's what a business requires, and it's what's going to help you have the highest degree of success, right? So it's so important for you, again, calling attention to these wonderful things. um, Real quick, checking in for people that are watching on YouTube and Twitch and Facebook, and then also LinkedIn. Hopefully, yeah, people are able to find their way, if LinkedIn's still kind of bugging out, over to the other streams. But yes, please use the chats to share what you're working on or post any questions. Um, Love to hear, love to share them with Morvareed so you can get some great insight and guidance on how to approach this appropriately. Um, yeah. Morvareed, has there been anything that I haven't touched on that you haven't brought up yet that you think would be highly valuable for founders, businesses at any stage?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just important to kind of really work on kind of putting some structures in place in the business. From the earlier the better. I think sometimes businesses leave it until too late and it creates issues. Like I've had clients who they don't necessarily, they let, like, for example, salespeople, they don't kind of like fully control them, and they'll go make deals that are not actually good for the company, like that aren't escalated to legal. So they'll agree, like they, didn't escalate a certain agreement to legal, and the customer decided to like change language, which wasn't actually to the benefit of the client. So then, once you're going through a round of investment or you're getting acquired and you're doing due diligence, this all kind of comes out, and it's like, oh well, great, now the valuation of the company is going down because there's these liabilities on the books that nobody should have agreed to, and these people didn't have authority to agree to, but they did, right? So it's kind of putting in like contracting processes and procedures, like I'll help clients do like playbooks so that they can educate their sales team about what they can agree to and what they need to escalate, right? Just creating like a structure around all of that so there aren't these surprises that'll come up when you're getting to a critical moment. I also think it's important to kind of think like kind of like creatively about what kind the problems that you're having in your business. I think sometimes people don't realize that they can kind of use legal proactively to try to generate more revenue, for example. And I'll use a specific example. So I had a client who was, this is a mistake that, a lot of some of startups make. They had been using a large law firm, which is not a good fit for a startup or scaling business, because they're really meant for, like, Fortune 100 companies, not really for, a close personal relationship. And they often put junior attorneys on the matters for the startups and small mid-sized businesses. So they had, made this mistake. They had like a new CFO. I had worked with their CFO at our prior startup he had been. So he had reached out to me and said, "Hey, there's just, we're trying to close another round of funding. We're having a lot of difficulty closing deals. It's like a 5-month sales cycle. We talked to them for the whole time. We put our agreement in front of them, and they don't want to sign it. They want to use their own agreement sometimes, which has nothing, which is not a SaaS agreement, because this was a SaaS company. I'm at my wit's end. I don't know what to do to close deals, right? So I looked at the agreement they were using. I could see why it was confusing their customers and it wasn't clear. So I created a much more straightforward agreement for them. I also talked to them about their sales process. I realized they were also not speaking about their product in a way that really tied it to what it actually was and how it was being legally presented. So I created language for them for their sales documentation that really better described their product from day one, when the cycle started. And so they began using these, deals started closing, and they were able to close a round of funding, in like 5 or 6 months based on having deals now. So it's like you can use it in a way, like if you're having friction in your business, if you think about it a little bit more creatively, you might be able to find like solutions to how to uh, streamline a lot of those processes.
Yeah, no, that's great. And it's a common issue that founders, again, at all stages can kind of find themselves dealing with in regards to how to effectively communicate what their product is, what their service is, what the unique experiences they're offering to specific people in the market, and how that's going to be beneficial and enjoyable for them, right? And that's usually a result of just being bombarded with every aspect of your business and your dreams and ambitions and what you want to go right, what could go wrong, what you're dealing with in the moment. It makes a person's brain go to mush very quickly. So, yeah, spending time with someone like yourself, with other service professionals that are focused on different elements of your business and having these conversations, it's invaluable exercises in a lot of ways, because you're able to sit with these people that can help you clear away a lot of the clutter and get hyper focused on what actually matters and how to communicate that appropriately. And then the having your extra insight and specialization to turn that into contract language that's easy to understand as well. That's like a bonus, right? It's helping out the business in so many different ways that most founders would be completely unaware of. So it's really cool example for you to share for sure. Um, it also brings up an idea, another question. What are your thoughts on lifetime deals, right? Like a lot of early founders with early products, they're trying to get people in as quickly as possible, and they're like, "Hey, sign this, one-time agreement for access to my SaaS, but you'll get a lifetime, subscription for, $100." What are your thoughts on that in terms of pros, cons, liability?
Yeah, I mean, I generally don't see that, or like at least with my clients, we don't ever really do that or see that. I think maybe sometimes, again, that maybe goes to the thing you had kind of raised earlier, where some businesses are just trying to like move fast and they're not really thinking about the long-term implications of what they're doing, right? So I think it goes back to thinking, kind of being strategic about, okay, what does it make sense for me to launch with? Like, how can I actually get traction? But what are also the long-term implications about this, right? Like, do I think I'm going to be a sustainable business? So I've seen sometimes issues like that come up when someone's trying to acquire a business and then the buyer isn't very happy about something like that, right? So it definitely is it's a liability down the line, right? So again, I think the overarching kind of theme is like talk to your lawyer because there's a lot of times I find clients have all these ideas and then I'll strategize with them and they're like, oh, now my thoughts are a lot clearer, like now I actually have a plan versus I'm just kind of throwing everything at the wall, right? Because like I think sometimes like founders just like throwing everything at the wall trying to see like what'll stick, but it's like no, you should have a plan. And then once you bring in like experts and you have those discussions, you start to actually formulate a way to move forward that is strategic versus just kind of randomly doing whatever you think will get traction.
Yeah, I think you pretty much nailed it. Like, yeah, a lot of founders, yeah, they don't have enough intentionality and structure around what they're doing, and so a lot of them feel like they have a plan, but the
Mhm.
lack of that, again, the structure and the documentation, it makes those plans very intangible and vague. And when it comes time to really assess the strategy of the plan and the intentionality of the plan, it's very difficult because the documentation doesn't exist, and you haven't had these conversations with the experts that, again, like yourself, are focused on key elements of a business, especially as it relates to law. And that could be lawyers, could be CPAs, insurance, whatever it is, right? There's a number of different boring, unsexy elements of business that a lot of founders, especially in the startup, circles, tend to avoid because, they think that it's not cool, or they think it's unnecessary, or it's too corporate. It's the antithesis of what a startup should be. But it's great hearing you call attention to these things and how invaluable and critically important they are to be successful or not end up in jail. So, yeah.
I also think people don't realize that the business strategy is intermingled with the legal strategy. So the legal strategy is meant to allow you to execute your business strategy, but they're intertwined. So you can't really like, particularly if if you're working with a lawyer who actually is like a bit like a good business lawyer, that's what the goal is. It's not the goal isn't to like stop you from doing what you're trying to do. The goal is like how can we get accomplish what you need to do, right? Like how can we get you there the most efficient, effective way possible, right? And I think that's where like a lot of like founders don't get it. They just don't get it that there are things that they're just not thinking about because they don't know. They don't know what to be they need to be thinking about. So they're just like thinking they're all being creative. They're going to do all this stuff with their like IP, but again, they're not thinking about like the situation with like the partnerships. I've had situations where clients have almost unintentionally open source their intellectual property because they didn't understand the implications of structuring a deal in this way would end up with an open source situation, right? I've had situations where clients are doing a government deal and again the way they were structuring it would end up with their IP belonging to the government. Again, they were excited, they just wanted to close the deal, they wanted to get the revenue on the books, but they're not realizing the implications of that. And that's why it's so important to realize legal is not something that can be separated from the business strategy. They're intertwined. So any deal you're making, you have to be thinking about the legal kind of implications at the same time so that you can structure a deal that is actually accomplishing your goal, but also protecting you and protecting your ownership of all the valuable assets at the same time and helping you figure out how can I actually monetize this, right? Because there's particularly first time founders, clients don't really even know all the monetization avenues they can explore. So I can tell them like, okay, if your goal is this, here's a better way you can monetize it with less like stress and less, risk to you. And they're like, oh, I didn't even think of that.
Yeah, yeah. Like the most common one is, oh, we'll just get a bunch of users and then sell a bunch of ads. And it's like, but what is your product? Like, is that adding or detracting from the user experience and the overall value that you're providing to people? And is that the best way? Like, yeah, it's again, it's really refreshing to hear you call attention to these things and speak to it from yeah, like in the manner that you did, where these things are intertwined, and it's critically important to be aware of that instead of trying to avoid it. And again, especially for founders that are trying to save money, they don't understand how these conversations, these exercises with a lawyer like yourself, isn't going to like avoiding it isn't going to save them money. It's likely to end up costing them a lot of money in potential penalties and other fines, and again, possible jail time, but also missing out on the opportunity to come up with better ways to monetize because you have experience working with a number of different businesses in similar industries, similar markets, fields, whatever it may be, and you can bring that to the table and help them again work within the legal structure to do that. So yeah, it's I yell at people all the time. Go talk to a lawyer. What are you doing? Like, just calm down. But it's great to hear directly from you what the real benefits are in ways that I'm not very good at expressing. But I will be better now. We've had this conversation. I got like a couple of bullet points that are wonderful. So yeah, this has been fantastic so far. And then also again, for those that are watching on YouTube, Twitch, LinkedIn, Facebook, use the text chat. Again, that's a good kind of reminder that Morvareed just shared. Talk about what you're working on. Share it with people so you can get that feedback and get insight, and hopefully take this very confusing idea you have and refine it to a cohesive strategy that's going to be more likely to result in success. On that note, Marie, when it comes to talking about your idea, there's a lot of founders that are very afraid of sharing, the idea at a high level. But then there's other founders who don't really understand what the trade secret should be or what elements they shouldn't speak to publicly that might have implications on seeking a patent or something similar. So I'd love to hear kind of like best practices advice on how to approach that before sitting down with a lawyer and getting real detailed with the context.
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, again, this is all like educational, but I think it's important to specifically if you have like specific questions about what you're kind of like talking about and all of that, important to like talk to an attorney about like what what specifically might be okay to say outside of a context of an NDA, what you should get an NDA in place for. Different parties have different approaches to all of this as well, right? Like you're not going to necessarily be able to get like a VC to sign an NDA, right? But like a potential vendor, that's like a different story, right? So there's going to be like strategy around who it is that you want to have these discussions with, what's the context, how much detail are you going to get, are you going to get into your secret sauce, or are you just generally kind of talk about your idea, right? So I think it's kind of again um thinking a little bit more critically about like, okay, is this my secret sauce that I need to expose? Is this just kind of like a general idea that I like I would have to share if I was going to pitch this thing, right? Like in the public. So it's kind of, I guess, thinking a little bit more critically about all the different elements of what you're working on. But I do think I run into a lot of people who are like often like very overprotective. They're like, well, I can't tell anyone about my idea. And I'm like, well, it's just an idea. You don't actually, you're not even talking about specifics, right? It's just like a general idea. But again, I think it goes back to that confusion where people think like just having an idea is something that's like protectable, right? Without actually like having specifics, right? About like how it would, how you're, effectuating it, or how the technology works, or source code, or things like that, right?
Yeah, yeah. It's it can be very confusing for a lot of people. And again, like you're saying, when someone doesn't yet have the experience or understanding of where an idea stops being an idea and becomes something tangible, intellectual property, or something that
Mhm.
it's a trade secret that is worth keeping secret, like a recipe, for example, or something like that.
Right.
It does cause a lot more of that confusion. But it's good to hear you, say that, yeah, if you're talking about the idea and you're keeping it high level, there's nothing to worry about. Like it's just an idea. It's like the idea of like I'm gonna make blueberry pancakes. Okay, that can be done in nearly infinite ways. It just requires batter and blueberries at the bare minimum. But are you gonna like caramelize sugar on the top of those? Are you gonna pour syrup, jam? Like what? Like there's so many different ways to take it further
Hmm.
to make it something unique and special, right? So,
Right. Right.
yeah, and the value there in talking about that is immense because you can start to have those conversations to refine the idea and figure out, oh, yeah, you know what? I think there is a real value in caramelizing some sugar on the top of my pancakes, right? So,
Hmm.
yeah,
Hmm.
it's super important. Um, yeah, coming up on time. You've been fantastic. I apologize for the very awkward and unexpected technical issues we came across. But yeah, hopefully, had a good time. People that are tuning in from the different services learned a lot. Even though they're shy, get you next time to post some questions, get more people interacting. But yeah, do you have any like final thoughts that you want to leave people with? Like, one, two little, key bits of information that be invaluable to them.
Yeah, I mean, always think the earlier you get legal involved, the better, right? And again, like one thing I do with my clients is like I'll help them prioritize, right? Like prioritize what needs to be done, so you don't have to do it all at once. And the lawyer can even be involved at a high level. Sometimes for like early stage clients, I'll be involved at that strategy level. Well, I'll have calls with them, talk through the issues, their goals, provide them strategy on like, okay, if this is what you're trying to do, this is, even if you're going to try to effectuate it yourself, here's what you got to be looking out for. Here's what you got to, make sure is in the agreement. Here's what you got to make sure when you have this discussion. Even that limited amount of assistance makes such a difference if you're trying to build a business that you really want to get investment and you want to grow and scale with. So I think don't be afraid to get legal involved early. It's just so important if you're trying to build a business that is going to succeed.
For those that are in not the best financial situation, and that's a lot of founders, unfortunately, especially, given state of things. What's your advice for them to seek necessary legal counsel? We've come up a couple times with this. There's different like organizations, but how do they feel that safety to reach out to someone like yourself if they're in a more tough financial situation to get that sort of support or at least guidance to legal counsel that can help?
Well, I mostly focus on working with startups. So, like for example, my rates are very reasonable. Even though I have, large law firm experience, I have my own practice and focus on working with, startups and small businesses. So it's already set at reasonable rates. And as I said, I am willing to even do, like targeted, like the whole strategy, like, okay, maybe you don't have the budget to have me draft all the agreements for you right now, but, let's, you know, divide up the time you have and spend that a lot on strategy so that you can, even if you're doing the laboring or you're at least getting guidance in doing that. And then once you have more of a budget, we can go and like clean up the documents and all that stuff, but at least this way you're not kind of moving forward in a vacuum. So I think a lot of that is just realizing, if you have a smaller budget, you're going to be focused initially on more strategic kind of counsel and advice, as until you get more of a budget where you can get kind of more full support legal drafting like documents for you, getting on negotiation calls with you. But at minimum, I think that strategy level for like really early stage businesses who have less of a budget, that's still something that they should invest in. And I think businesses need to realize, if they don't, like, this is again something that differentiates businesses that fail from successful businesses, is businesses, they like the founders need to invest in the business themselves. They can't be asking others to invest in it. Like, you can't go to investors and expect investors to invest in a business when you have no skin in the game yourself.
Yeah, for sure. And a theme that kind of gets touched on a lot too, that's related to this, is going slow and steady. You don't need to be in a rush. You can go at your own pace and not worry about it. The main trick with that is managing your expectations and your risk at the same time, so you're able to move at a slower pace without any consequences, right? And like you're saying, working in a limited capacity with a lawyer, it's fine as long as your pace for the rest of your business is matching the pace that you're working with the lawyer, so you don't get ahead of things. You're not inviting that legal risk because you decided to skip a step. You got impatient. And like you're saying too, investing in the business yourself, for some that are like more difficult financial situations, that just means that they have to spend more time working other job to save up before they start moving forward with their own business idea. That's like the trade-off. But yeah, as long as you're going slow and steady and you're managing those expectations and risk, I don't think anyone should have to be worried about, oh no, we're gonna fail because we're going too slow.
Right. Yeah, I agree. Slow and steady, like that's how you build a sustainable business, right?
Yeah. Yes. I think that's a great note to end on. Morvareed, you're always wonderful. I appreciate you so much for being a part of this. And everyone that tuned in, YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitch, I always forget Facebook. I remembered now. Thank you for being a part of this. And hopefully you all, got some inspiration, some education, and maybe we'll follow up with Morvareed. Information's on LinkedIn profile and all the event pages. And catch you next time. All right. Thank you, Morvareed.
Thanks, everyone. Good to see you guys.